Good afternoon from near Brighton in Sussex. I'm here with Joseph Langford. Joseph, very good to be here with you, and we're here at the site of the Chestnut War Memorial, which is a memorial that was raised in acknowledgement of the service of Indian Army soldiers, some of whom came to their death in Brighton, and this is the site of the funeral pyre that was marking their passing on. So it's quite a religious site here, Joseph, and it's actually also a very stunning view. We'll walk down, and so thank you for bringing me here. This is I think a walk that you've done on a regular basis.
A couple of times with the family, yeah, absolutely. It's good to exercise our eldest. I come up here, but equally just the view as it starts to open up behind you as you look back down into the city of Brighton and Hove is quite fantastic. But I think there's a prominence about this space as well. It's quite quiet, and it's a nice opportunity to come up sometimes and just reflect. And
on the policing friendship tour now, roughly 6 months in, this is, let's just pause for a moment or two, and unfortunately the camera won't pick up quite all the beauty of this stunning view. It's very much in the distance, and then this memorial here, as it says, to the memory of all the Indian soldiers who gave their lives in the service of their King Emperor in the Great War. This monument erected on the site of the funeral pyre. So we're here though to talk in the main about policing, and you and I first met, I'm going to say something like, might even have been 8 years ago, something of that order, at the point when you were working for O2 Telefonica.
That's right.
As a supplier to UK policing. You subsequently moved to become the Chief Digital and Technology Officer of Surrey and Sussex Police here in the UK, and just recently you've joined VMware as their you best give me the title that you have, which is
public sector CTO, Chief Technology Officer.
Chief Technology Officer, overseeing their work in, I think, the whole of government, is that all of public sector?
Yeah, so healthcare, defence, intelligence, policing, central government.
Quite a wide-ranging set of responsibilities there. Again, we're going to focus on the policing responsibilities, though we might cast our eye a little wider than that at some point. Let's start with, though, your earlier career. So you worked at O2 Telefonica. You moved to Surrey and Sussex, going from private sector into public sector. Go on, tell us about the differences. Good and bad, perhaps. I don't know whether
not
bad.
At all. So, I mean, working in a big multinational and the kind of, I suppose, the nuance of that, and then going into, I suppose, a public sector business, they're a lot closer than you think, actually, particularly around things like governance and protocols, etc., around how, certainly you manage the environments, your money, as well as obviously like kind of development of people and the responsibility you have to the employees as well. But there wasn't as much of a transition surprise as perhaps I was expecting, and I think in a way, because even before O2 I'd been working in Capita and had worked with local government and education in that space. For me, I suppose I kind of understood and empathised with the complexities of the public sector before I went in, and realistically there wasn't really any shockers, actually. I mean, I suppose the only difference was it was the first time I've had a location of work that wasn't home, but that was quite nice in its own way as well.
And hopefully living not too far from your place of work, so the commute wasn't too challenging.
No, not at all. I mean, whether it be Surrey's HQ, that was only about 60 minutes drive, or Sussex about 25 minutes. It was actually quite pleasant, being able to pop in and out of the office without a longer return journeys to some of the locations I'd work out of when I was working in O2. No, not at all.
And then when you've been at Surrey and Sussex for approximately a year, that was the point at which the pandemic hit, there or thereabouts. And all of a sudden huge amount of change necessary in order to get people who were previously working from force premises actually to working remotely.
Correct. There was a massive shift almost overnight. You know, a lot of organisations, not just policing in general, you know, experienced perhaps people who had laptops but had never accessed and instructed their VPN. Potentially people who had never really taken their laptop home. It was really just something they kind of opened, turned, and then used the desktop monitor, mouse and keyboard to drive it. So I mean, the anecdote that kind of I think really kind of hammers home the change was the night before kind of obviously the lockdown instruction was given. That working day, I think it was about an average of 45 to 50 people concurrently connected to our systems remotely. That went up to over 1,700 the next working day. And
goodness, so from 50 to 1,700 in a single day, and the system didn't fall over?
No, I mean, obviously when it comes to things like kind of disaster recovery and business continuity, you almost need to buy for the worst, and you know, kind of people often term it a bit of an insurance policy in a lot of instances. But I think the thing is you kind of have to try and play out for every possible scenario that may come about, and in some instances the difficulty is to kind of try and gauge how big that is. And in this instance, 1,700 was not the total amount of employees that needed remote work access. It was closer to 3,000, concurrently probably about 2,800. So there was 1,000 people we needed to mobilise, and actually this had got us a good distance, but there was obviously considerably more employees that were kind of in desperate need of accessibility to the tools and services. And unlike the private sector, of course, the responsibility of being able to ensure that those people who probably are working on some part of an important function of policing have access to those services was a challenge that certainly the team I was responsible for at the time really stood up to.
And some significant security aspects to that as well. The private sector would have security considerations of matters that are price sensitive, if you like, whereas for policing it's very much about private information and the like that you want to make sure is secure on those virtual networks.
Well, I mean, again, in all instances, public or private, the change all of a sudden to more people working from home meant that every organisation's entire physical footprint of space grew exponentially because you had all these people working from home. The side effect of that is that kind of perhaps your kind of process of understanding the vetting risk or the kind of employment risk of those individuals would have typically been kind of built around actually where those people are going to work, in an office with other people, perhaps not kind of taking information and access to information electronically home with them. And of course the other thing is that for those employees, kind of notwithstanding the kind of isolation that obviously a lot of people felt, the other complexity is that technology isn't something that everybody gets. It's something that kind of in a lot of instances can feel kind of quite frustrating and sometimes get in the way of what feels like a kind of doing a good job, or the job you kind of can the best you can. And what was an observation for a lot of organisations was that where you would potentially have one colleague be able to tap a colleague on the shoulder and go, how do you do this, or my computer's showing me this screen, have you ever seen that before? They weren't able to do that anymore.
So it's some significant business change responsibilities as well, and not just the technological challenge, but the changed behaviours and also the impact on individuals that there was from now being isolated, whereas they previously were working in a team. Just before we sort of develop that further, I just want to pan round the camera and remark on this beautiful view. This isn't quite working from home. This is sort of working out in the country. Now I'm going to move you onto this side, just so that we can get a better view of the countryside as we're walking here. So, to what extent was this a solus Surrey Sussex police effort to get things mobilised? To what extent were there other partners public sector, private sector involved in getting from the 1700. It sounds like you were able to achieve the jump from 50 to 1700 because of the good practice you'd put, or the good policies you'd put in place already, the kit and so on.
So it was, but equally I think that actually there was great demonstration from the private sector to recognise what they needed to do, particularly those who were supplying services to both private and public sector. Our incumbent connectivity service supplier at that time, for example, they offered to increase the kind of connectivity, so the internet connectivity for the organisation, not because more people needed to access it internally, but because of course there was more traffic coming into the organisation that kind of hadn't been catered for. And there are huge examples of that. I know in some instances kind of when it comes to licensing types that people had historically procured that may restrict access to some functions and features, those things were relaxed so that people could have more kind of remote collaboration tools and access to those types of capabilities. But I also kind of think that even the government's foresight to kind of actually relax some of the procurement controls to help organisations rapidly be able to go out and buy the things that addressed kind of those emergency needs that they had was kind of, I just think, really well thought out and probably drove a huge amount of kind of innovation that is likely to stay for a long time now, Bernard, because people were allowed to trial things that ultimately were because there was a business risk that needed addressing, rather than perhaps just because it was an opportunity to change business models.
So there were sort of needs must innovations that actually turned out to be very useful innovations, even as hopefully we're emerging from the pandemic. Certainly here in the UK appear to be doing so, though I hope that's not tempting fate too much. So innovation there that is as a result of almost a needs must. The situation was such that there needed to be rapid innovation. But what about sort of more general innovation outside the pandemic? How do you think policing does on ICT innovations? Could it do better?
I think every aspect of every industry kind of does well and then underperforms in general. I think actually you look at some of the national initiatives like the NEP and
so the acronym, the National Enabling Programme, and for those watching from outside the UK, that's very broadly
it is the standardisation and kind of national deployment of a singular kind of Windows 10 Office 365, ultimately trying to give every police staff member and police officer the same experience and access to those core Microsoft products. I think it's a really noble initiative, and the team kind of works really hard to ultimately help.
This is the NEP team, the national team.
They work really hard to kind of actually drive what I think is a really powerful foundation for the development of local initiatives or regional initiatives even. But I also kind of think that where there is need for kind of ideas and actually kind of the ability to take on more innovation, I think that actually there has been a change, probably I think accelerated by the pandemic, that there is kind of more interaction between, I suppose, industry or marketplace and actually those who consume the services. And another instance in PDS is Police Digital Services.
Thank you.
Is absolutely around like kind of them in partnership with justice and ultimately looking about the really complex challenge of like kind of investigating serious offences, sexual offence. And the approach that they've taken is to recognise that there is kind of so much insight, so much knowledge from obviously the police forces themselves, from the Home Office and the MOJ, but from academia, from kind of from scientists analysing the data, all the way through to the police officers, the investigators, the police staff themselves, and kind of bringing together all of those different kind of mindsets, those different walks of life, and then also the industries to come together to try and overcome those challenges. It's an incredibly smart thing to do.
So it's the teamwork beyond the immediate boundaries of the force or forces. Surrey and Sussex have quite a tradition of working together on ICT, to some extent also with in the past Hampshire and Thames Valley. There are 4 of the 43 forces in England and Wales. But much more effort over recent years to provide a suitably coordinated national approach, still with some independence on forces' part, but much more a shared sense of direction.
The police services across the UK, they all have kind of nuanced, localised challenges. There are kind of big central kind of themes that affect policing in general, but in a lot of instances, kind of the needs of one county to another may differ because of everything from geography all the way through to obviously the kind of the demographic that they have, and in a way, that's why collaboration is so hard. And I'm not the first to have said that, and I won't be the last. It's really difficult because everyone comes at it from a different point. Whether it be the organisation's financial situation, their kind of technology underpinnings, whether it be their business processes, or whether it be actually kind of potentially the politics that plays out within their particular county or region. All of those things have an effect on accelerating or decelerating collaboration. And if you consider that police digital services, the underpinning of the national enabling program I'm talking about, the fact that they've been able to create a common standard, so one that everyone's been able to adopt, and it hasn't been easy in a lot of instances, I can assure you of that. But what they have done is they've given everyone a new set of foundations that they can grow on themselves. But they've also given them the ability to show that even if you are coming from different points of view, that you can all work together.
It's always struck me over my 30 years working in policing that the police governance structure, just about in any area, but ICT, as we're discussing now, is an absolute morass. Spaghetti Junction, well-known junction in Birmingham, of the motorway system here, doesn't really do it justice. It's so much more complicated than that, and so many more different bodies and parties that need in some way to give their blessing, give their agreement to sort of new routes, new shared ways forward. And what you're describing there for UK, well, England and Wales, policing in England and Wales more accurately, a good example of coming together in that. And I guess now that you're at VMware, your knowledge of the governance structures, the small p politics, if you like, of policing, albeit policing is just one part of your responsibilities, that will give you an insight into how VMware approaches the policing marketplace here in the UK.
It does. It was one of the main reasons for a business that has a portfolio of products and services that are ultimately there to kind of obviously either kind of help innovation, deploy innovation, or kind of actually grow opportunity for kind of the private sector, or ultimately kind of improve the services for citizens and communities in the public sector. And in that instance, what I recognised was that I think a lot of private sector organisations that kind of sell services into the public sector, I think they're a bit guilty of assuming that others can translate what they were going on about. And Bernard, you and I have spoken off camera about how many acronyms policing and ICT has.
Absolutely, I'm pretty good at policing acronyms. It's the ICT acronyms that completely confound and befuddle me. You've got the combination of both policing and the ICT. So
if you ever find someone using an acronym, challenge them to see how long it takes them to work out what the old actual words were in that acronym. But in this instance, for me, the kind of, I suppose, the prominence about the kind of, I suppose, these products and services is that that there is a renewed appetite for innovation. There is a renewed appetite to do things differently. Budgets have been kind of hugely impacted by disruption through 2020 as a financial year, and it probably will be for 3 or 4 years to come at least, I suspect. Now, in those instances, I think that more of that partnership working that I was talking about when it came to some of the approaches of the Home Office and police digital services, I think kind of really have an opportunity to eke out where actually there is a need for co-investment or co-innovation together, recognising that that actually the kind of challenges of of policing may be slightly more nuanced as you get kind of from county to county, but the principles, of course, are the same.
That suggests a real challenge in terms of the tendering approach, though, because if policing, private sector and public sector are to work together, it's satisfying the caution on risk that both parties would have, particularly the private sector on their intellectual property. Well, let's ask a question. Is there an appetite, and are the tendering procedures up to the job?
I fear not, probably a generalist perspective, but I think that some areas kind of can be addressed. You look at kind of some of the benefits that organisations have got from frameworks like G-Cloud, where actually they've been able to bring together different parts and components of a service and ultimately kind of put that together and create the outcome they want. I think anything to do with innovation where there isn't a kind of a governed control that allows you to potentially kind of invest in partnership or buy a service from one to the other is always going to be a complication for the public sector.
So opportunities there for sure. And I'm just going to pause for a second and pan the camera around, because we have here the outskirts of Brighton on the horizon. The tower that you may be able to see right in the background there is actually on Brighton Beach. I forget now, but it's a bubble that rises and falls.
The I-360.
The I-360 that you can go and observe, and those who were at the top of that in the bubble, if it were there, would be able to see us right now. And that's one of the motorways. Now that's the motorway leaving Brighton, I think, and heading away up towards London.
Well, that's actually the coast road.
That's the coast road, is it? I beg your pardon.
All the way down to Portsmouth and beyond.
So we're coming back towards where the start of our walk and the end of our walk, and we've got into the subject of innovation, which we could explore for some considerable time more. But time's a little pressing on our side. We've had a good conversation, and we will explore that innovation conversation separately and maybe publicly at some stage in the near future. But it's become a tradition on these Policing Friendship tour walks to ask the person I'm walking with to nominate a charity or charities that's dear to their heart. And Joe, we touched on this a little earlier, and I think you have a couple in mind.
I do. There's one that sticks out actually, and myself, family, and the in-laws, we've been doing a lot of work this year to raise some money for an organisation called the Water Project. They're a US charity, but the work that they've been doing has basically been around access to safe water in Africa, and the rationale for that actually for us was that they continued to work tirelessly all the way through the pandemic, and I think that just given the challenges of what they were doing anyway, which is the complex infrastructure needed to kind of supply kind of safe water to children in schools and wells into kind of local villages, they continued to try and do that through the pandemic and still do, and just felt compelled obviously to do that. But I would encourage people to seek out what they do.
It's a remarkable charity looking to provide one of the absolute essentials for life, water itself. When here in the UK, so often we're blessed with just about all the key services that we require, and water in Africa an absolute essential.